Welcome to Divine Decode, where we untangle the hidden ties between our habits and our higher self. Tonight, we are diving deep with Steve Frazier, entrepreneur, wellness advocate, and author of Release the Coffee Cups. After decades in the fast lane, Steve discovered that freedom doesn't always come with more energy drinks. Sometimes it begins with less caffeine and more consciousness. Welcome to the show, Steve. It's such an honor to have you.
Well, thank you. It is my pleasure.
So, Steve, what first made you realize that caffeine wasn't fueling you, it was controlling you?
11 years ago, I had been a chronic caffeine user for perhaps 30 years, and I had a health incident where I thought I was having a heart attack, and I went to the emergency room, and they hooked me up to an EKG machine, and the EKG machine was spiking every time I had a palpitation. And the doctor came in and he told me, he said, "You're going to be okay. You have what's called premature ventricular contractions, and they're called PVCs." And he said, "Everybody has them. You just happen to be one of those unique people, maybe 5% of the population that can feel them." I said, "Okay. Sounds good. What's causing this? Why am I having this?" He said, "Well, probably the biggest thing is stress." I said, "Okay." And then he paused and he said, and he smirked a little bit and he said, "And caffeine." Yeah. And I had been traveling that morning and I was anticipating, I had a 12-hour day ahead of me, traveling 3 hours, working for 6 hours on my feed, traveling 3 hours home. So I had been loading up on caffeine, and I on those trips, I drank probably 3 to 5 cups of coffee, 1 or 2 energy drinks. And so I was just chronically using caffeine. Well, I quit. So I think I quit for probably a year or two. And then just like every other addict, I said to myself, "Oh, you can control this. You have everything under control." And so I started again, and I just kept going until 2 years ago. I just realized that I was being captive of caffeine. And so I quit cold turkey, which I would not recommend you do because it is brutal. And the reason is that, one, you get this massive headache and brain fog and fatigue. And why that happens is that in the process, when you drink caffeine, it blocks something called the adenosine receptors in your brain. And that's what puts you to sleep at night. And I'll touch on this a little bit later on in the sleep cycle. But when you quit caffeine, particularly cold turkey, what happens is that the adenosine receptors open up and you have this massive blood flow to your brain. And the only solution is to drink caffeine. Otherwise, just you drink water and more water to try to flush it out of your system. But because those adenosine receptors are open up. And so since then, I have occasionally used caffeine when I felt I needed to be alert. It's been a while now. It's been, probably a couple months. I did something first time in my life. I drove to Florida and back, which is a 25-hour trip. And I never used caffeine. And I had always, every trip in the past, I do it twice a year. And I walked into the hotel room the first night, and I'd driven 12 and a half hours. And my wife hit the elevator button, and I looked at her and I said, "This is the best I've ever felt after driving for 12 and a half hours," because I didn't crash at all. And I went to sleep. I went to sleep when I got in, because normally when I would do that, because I wasn't a habitual caffeine user, I would lay awake sometime in the bedroom or bed for 3 hours, just lay there, because I'm wired from the caffeine, because my adenosine receptors were still plugged. So that is why I got involved in this. And my mission is not to condemn anybody, not to shame or guilt. It is to provide information to people so that they can make their own decision. Because I've learned something. I'm 68 years old, and I've actually learned a couple things. and I've actually paid attention, and that is that we can't make anybody do anything because we all have free will and free won't. And so if I was to tell you, well, I want you to straighten your hair and cut it, you would say, well, I'm not going to do that. And I can't make you do that. And I just so you know, I have no desire to do that. But you know what I mean? I can't make anyone quit caffeine. I have no desire. I've actually handed my book to a number of friends and family, and the first thing they say to me is, you can't take my coffee from me. And I say, I have no intention of doing that because I can't, because you decide what goes in your body. But what I can do is I can give you some information, which I'm doing in this book, which perhaps you know someone that's going to that's having some of these negative health effects. And if you do, then maybe they can address this, okay? Because there's a lot of negative things that come out of chronic caffeine use. And when I say chronic, basically if you drink caffeine every day, you're a chronic user. Unless you're drinking 1 cup early in the morning. And because that may not affect your circadian rhythm. Because what it all comes down to, what I believe one of the major pluses of quitting caffeine is how you sleep at night. Because you are going to sleep so much better, you'll be amazed. And what happens in your sleep? Well, I'll tell you. I'll talk about the sleep cycle for a minute. There's 4 stages in the sleep cycle. And you have the first stage where you're just falling up. You're falling into that. You're semi-conscious. You're falling into a sleep. Stage 2 is the longest step. You have some brain activity, but not much. But then 3 and 4 are where stage 3 is where you heal. So men produce testosterone. Women produce estrogen. Everybody, you repair your cells in your muscles. And you heal. Your body heals itself. And stage 4 is REM sleep, and that's deep sleep. And that's where you dream, and that's where your brain is actually repairing itself as well. Now, when that is disrupted, and caffeine disrupts that, what happens is that both of those last 2 stages they're not activated as soon, and they're also shortened. And so in that cycle, those 4 stages happen 4 to 6 times a night. So it just doesn't go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, 4. It repeats 4 to 6 times. And so caffeine disrupts that cycle, because when you drink caffeine during the day, you are blocking your adenosine receptors. And so what happens is that you don't naturally go to sleep at night. Your circadian rhythm is like this. And I'm going to use myself as an example because I don't drink caffeine. I have a lot of energy when I wake up. So when I wake up in the morning, the first thing I do is I go to my bedroom, my living room window, and I look to the east. That's where the sun's coming up. Now it's dark when I get up, so I have a sun lamp. But what that does is it helps boost my cortisol, which naturally, it's a stress hormone, but your body produces it every morning naturally to get you going for the rest of your day. And so in this case, it's a good thing. And then throughout the day, your cortisol goes down, and then adenosine and melatonin go up. And then you go to sleep when you're supposed to. So as an example, I got up at 5 o'clock this morning, and I have a lot of energy in the morning. I'm ready to go. And then throughout the day, I gradually lose that energy, and I get tired because my adenosine receptors in my brain are starting to get the molecules. When you drink caffeine, those adenosine receptors get plugged because the caffeine molecule is very similar to the adenosine molecule. So here's what happens, and a lot of people do this. The first thing they do when they get up in the morning is they drink coffee or tea or energy drink or a soda that has caffeine in it because they're tired and they want that boost. They talk about Don't talk to me before I have my coffee, that kind of thing. Okay, they're crabby. And the reason is that they are actually having withdrawal from caffeine when they wake up. And that brain fog and that fatigue, that is the withdrawal. They might have a slight headache, but that's the beginning of withdrawal from caffeine. So when you drink caffeine first thing in the morning, this is what happens. First of all, it's a diuretic. So you have to go to the bathroom. And when you go to the bathroom, you're not just getting rid of water, you're also getting rid of minerals like calcium and magnesium, which are crucial for your bones and for your body, your health. If you don't supplement those, you will be deficient in those forever. And gradually your body will just kind of go to pot. Now, I'm not giving medical advice here. What I would recommend is that if you're drinking caffeine and you're not supplementing, talk to particularly a natural health provider, and they'll guide you to how much and what to take to supplement those minerals. Now, what else happens when you drink the caffeine first thing in the morning? You get a dopamine hit. Okay, and dopamine is a wonderful thing. It happens in your body every day. It's basically a natural high. And you get that when you just think about the coffee, and then it's reinforced when you actually drink the coffee. That's not a bad thing, except when you do it 5 or 10 times a day, your adrenal glands get a little tired. Now, what else happens is that when you drink caffeine, your adrenal glands put more cortisol into your body. Now, this is where your circadian rhythm is messed up, because now you're awake longer and the cortisol is upsetting your circadian rhythm. And again, if you only drink 1 cup early in the morning, you're probably okay. But if you drink coffee all morning and then halfway through the afternoon or even up till supper, you're just not going to go to sleep. You're going to go to sleep, but it's not going to be healthy sleep. It's going to be you're just going to be there. You're sleeping, but you're not healing. And then guess what happens? You wake up in the morning and you're tired. And what do? You drink more caffeine. And this is a rinse and repeat. And in my book, my book is called Release the Coffee Cups, Winning the Battle with Caffeine. There's 14 chapters in the middle. There's over 300 references. And in every chapter, I talk about this rinse and repeat cycle. And I put it in there that many times because it's that important. People need to understand that once you get on this hamster wheel, for lack of a better analogy, it never ends. It's like a hamster going around and round and round. You just keep doing it. And then what happens is that as your brain adenosine receptors fill up, your brain actually creates more adenosine receptors because your body's saying, I need some sleep, so I need more adenosine receptors. Well, then you're just plugging more. So the more you do this, the worse it is when you quit drinking caffeine. So it's a perpetual loop. And there's one more thing that happens when you drink caffeine, and this happens every time you drink it. Now, when I talk about these things, there are always exceptions, and these are more than generalities, but we don't control what our body does. Our body's going to do what it was designed to do because our bodies are beautifully and wonderfully made. And if we don't mess with them, they work really well. But then when you start eating processed food and you drink caffeine, and then we can go down the whole list of things that we're doing to ourselves, right? So another thing that happens in the morning or anytime you drink caffeine is it releases adrenaline, because the caffeine says to the adrenal glands, you're in a fight or flight. And that's what adrenaline and cortisol is the same thing. They're both stress hormones. And they're designed for you to go in to run away from a bear or a tiger or a lion or a robber or whatever. It's a fight or flight, or if you need to literally fight someone. What your body does is it puts glucose into your muscles. And This is great because that's what it's intended to do, because your body thinks you're in fight or flight. And you need that extra energy in your muscles to do whatever you need to do, whether it's run or fight or whatever the case. Now, if you're drinking caffeine and you're sitting at your kitchen table or counter, or you're sitting at your desk at work, or even if you're in your car just driving to work, you are not in fight or flight, and you're not going to use that glucose in your muscles. So what happens is your blood sugar spikes. Now, nobody really talks about this, and this is just from black coffee. This isn't having to do with cream or sugar. Just think about how much sugar is in some of the coffee drinks, at some of the big chains. So what does your body do? Your body produces insulin because it has to counteract the blood sugar. So now you've got this cycle. Your blood sugar spikes, shoots insulin, brings it down. Spikes, brings it down. Spikes, everything starts to wear out. The adrenal glands start to say, hey, he's telling me all the time that he's in fight or flight. He's kidding me. So maybe I don't need to put enough adrenaline in. And then your pancreas starts to get tired, and that leads to type 2 diabetes, okay? Which means that you have to now start to really watch what you eat. At some point, you may need to take some insulin, because if your pancreas can't produce enough insulin, you have to supplement that. Caffeine affects each one of us differently, but it affects men and women differently. In particular, for men, one of the big things is it raises our blood pressure. Again, when your adrenaline spikes, your blood pressure goes up because your heart starts to beat faster because you're in that fight or flight. So it can actually lead to long-term blood pressure problems, because if you're drinking a lot of caffeine, your blood pressure is going to go up. And then it also messes with men's testosterone, because testosterone and cortisol don't get along, because the more cortisol that you have in your body, the less testosterone you're going to have, and you won't produce as much because your body's producing cortisol. Now, this is important for a number of reasons. The testosterone, one is libido. Okay. If your libido goes down, you don't want to make babies, right? And it sounds kind of silly, but it's the truth. But what it also does when your testosterone is low and you drink caffeine, it can fracture the sperm. So you have, it decreases the mobility and the motility. So you have perhaps a less chance of conceiving a baby if you're trying to have a baby. Now, when we flip over to the women's side, we'll just go right to the baby thing, right? What happens is that when a woman's drinking caffeine, it decreases the blood flow to the uterus where the egg is. And then that combination of a man and a woman both drinking caffeine can lead to, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen, but can lead to a problem conceiving the child, right? So if you know someone that's having problems trying to have a baby and they're both drinking caffeine, that could be a mitigating factor. Now, how else does it affect a woman? Well, because there's a lot of hormonal stuff going on with women, more than men, they get much more anxious, and their anxiety goes up. And ironically, at different times of the menstrual cycle, caffeine is processed differently in the woman's body. So there's a phase called the luteal phase, which is the 14 to 28 days into the cycle. And those days are the days before it comes up to the period. And in that time, the woman processes caffeine 70% slower. So a normal half-life of caffeine is 5 to 8 hours. So you add 70% onto that, it's now 8 to 12 hours or 8 to 13 hours. So if you drink a cup of coffee at noon and it's got 150 milligrams of caffeine, at 10 o'clock at night, you conceivably will have 75 milligrams still active in your body. Now, if you know somebody that is having problems with caffeine at that time of their period, or their menstrual cycle, this could be the issue. Caffeine also worsens PMS symptoms. and cramps and things like that. And so those are all contributing factors, and that has to do with the estrogen. And also, if you take birth control pills, which are elevating your estrogen, you'll also have this slower processing. So if you know somebody, pass this information on. Now, here's my micro mission statement. I'll give this to you. And that is, once again, I can't make anybody stop drinking caffeine. I would encourage any pregnant woman to not drink caffeine. And for these other reasons. Because the fetus does not have free will or free won't. The fetus is completely reliant on mom for whatever nutrients it's going to get. And so the caffeine crosses the placental and the blood-brain barrier. And so baby takes in all the caffeine. Now here's the unique aspect of this. There's an enzyme in our livers. It's called the CPY182. And our livers process 95% of the caffeine that goes into our bodies. And it's through that enzyme. Babies don't develop that enzyme until they're 3 to 6 months old. So when they're in the womb, they don't have the ability to process caffeine out of their bodies. So for that 9 months that babies getting caffeine from mom, what happens is that it stays in their bodies. So then they're born. 12 hours after they're born, they start to scream bloody murder. And the doctor says, oh, that's normal. Oh, yeah, your baby's colicky. Never considering the fact if mom's been drinking caffeine, that baby's got an incredible adenosine headache. Because you realize those adenosine receptors have now opened up. And, everything I'm talking about is in the book. It's all cited. It's all referenced. I'm not making this up. These aren't my opinions. My opinion is that we want to encourage pregnant women not to drink caffeine. But there's more. It's just like the infomercial. There's more. Because caffeine, through studies, leads to low birth weight, can lead to miscarriages, can lead to stillbirths, can lead to development issues like ADD and ADHD, and also physical development issues. And again, these are all documented. They're all studies. I'm just not making this up to try to scare you, because these are just facts, and they're objective facts. They're not subjective facts. And so my micro mission of my role here in Release the Coffee Cuffs is to get my message particularly to pregnant women. Okay. And there's a lot of pregnant women. I don't know how many babies are born every year, but it's millions, right? And we all know that some of them, if not many of them, are drinking caffeine. It's estimated that 75 to 80% of adults in the world drink caffeine every day. In the United States, it's 85%. That's in the United States, just 200 to 300 million people drink caffeine every day. Well, some of those people are pregnant. And so, if you know someone, please pass this information on to them. And we have been programmed from birth to accept caffeine as part of life. It's a legal psychoactive stimulant drug. Okay. It affects the central nervous system. It's socially accepted and it's socially promoted oftentimes, because it's $1 trillion business, $1 trillion. So there's a lot of money involved here. And so nobody wants to talk about the downside. Now, a lot of this has to do with something called cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance is when you have a belief system that is threatened by new information. So we've been told since birth that caffeine and coffee are good. You watch commercials. Little kids are watching their mom and dads drink coffee in the morning. What are they thinking? They're thinking, well, look at that. This is what it takes to be a good parent, a successful parent, a happy parent. Mom's got a mug that says, don't talk to me before I drink this, that kind of thing. So, and the subconscious mind is programmed from birth to 7 years old. So if these kids are seeing this, these young kids are seeing this, they have the belief that coffee makes for a successful adult. And that's where that's self-sabotage. And I talk about in my book about you can reprogram your subconscious mind. However, it takes some work, because one of the things that I'll pass on here, it's hard to be healthy. It is not easy to be healthy, because it's so easy to go out and eat fast food. It's so easy to have caffeine or alcohol or cigarettes or drugs or prescription drugs. This is easy. You're part of the herd. That's what everybody else is doing. My challenge today is be a rebel. Don't do what the herd is doing. Just because your buddy says, you don't drink caffeine, you should. You don't drink coffee? You know, a friend of mine, I had lunch with him a couple months ago, and we had breakfast. And the waitress came up and he ordered a coffee and I ordered a decaf. And he slammed his hands down on the table and he said, decaf? And I said, yeah, caffeine doesn't agree with me. And then about 5 minutes later, I said, you know, I just want to bring something up. And we're good enough friends that I could bring this up. I said, you realize that when you did that, 9 out of 10 people would have taken a regular cup of coffee and not decaf, because you were trying to socially pressure me into drinking caffeine. Now, there's a lot of this going on with alcohol, cigarettes, drugs. So this is just not caffeine. But when you want to quit, you have to have a plan. You don't just try to quit. You have to have a plan. And then you either quit or you don't. Don't try, because you're going to fail if you try. You just don't do it. And so have a plan and have support system put in. And I would recommend not doing it cold turkey. I would say taper off. And it doesn't matter how long you take. It could take you 2 weeks or 8 weeks. Just cut back very, very shortly, cut back on your caffeine intake. So what your body is not going to rebel when you're at the end and it's not getting any caffeine. How does that sound?
I really like the part when you said that don't try, either you do it or you don't. But I feel like when you enter something with the trying mindset, you don't give it 100% of yourself.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And but like that's powerful. Like it's amazing how awareness alone can start shifting deeply ingrained patterns.
You're right. I was in the restaurant business and we had a bar. I was in there for 23 years. I had 6 different restaurants, and a lot of the employees smoked and drank. And when they would come up to me and they would say, tomorrow I'm going to try to quit smoking. I just wanted to warn you. And I would look at them and I would just chuckle and I'd say, don't even waste your time. Because if you're just going to try to quit smoking, you're going to fail. You're going to be miserable for a couple of days before you start again. You're going to make me miserable because you're crabby, because you're not having a cigarette. Okay. And it'll be the same thing with caffeine. It's any addiction, right? They're all have a couple things in common, is that it's hard to quit, but it's harder to stay quitting. And you have to have a plan. You have to have a support system put into place. And I'll leave you with this, and that is that if you know someone that knows any of the symptoms that I talked about, please pass this on. And perhaps that someone is you. Maybe you should reevaluate your relationship with caffeine and say, I might feel better if I don't drink caffeine. Let's look at it. How much do I really drink? Things like that. So, and you can reach me at releasethecoffeecuffs.com. That's CUFFS. That's my website. There's a contact page. You can send me emails. I will respond if you have questions. You can also buy the book there on my website. You can also buy it on all the major platforms, Amazon, Kindle. I'm going to record an Audible version this winter, so it'll be on Audible probably late winter, early spring. And thank you so much. Thank you for having me on.
It's a pleasure. It's been such a refreshing conversation. Steve reminds us that energy isn't found in a cup. It's cultivated through presence, balance, and self-honesty. If you're ready to reclaim your calm, explore Release the Coffee Cup and take the first sip of freedom. And until next time, keep decoding your patterns and discover the divine within your daily choices.